Wednesday, February 12th, 2020, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are my colleagues, Kiely and Earnest Perry. On our program this week, a new 24-hour cable news network. It's debuted this Monday. We're going to talk about the Black News Channel, produced for the African American community by African Americans. It took a lot to get to this week's launch, and we're going to talk about that. We'll also talk about some of the questions that Gayle King asked Lisa Leslie about her dear friend Kobe Bryant. Were those questions out of line, or was King just doing her job? And a historic night at the Oscars as a foreign language film picks up Best Picture honors. There's a lot more that hopefully we'll talk to before our half hour is up today, but we're going to start with coverage around the globe of the coronavirus, strife with a lot of fear, a lot of speculation, and now a lot of censorship. In China, there has been a crackdown on what information is being released, both by state media, private media, and even citizens on social media platforms as well.
Well, I don't think we should be surprised by that because you have this. It's really causing havoc on tourism. It's causing havoc on their overall economy, and there was at the beginning of this a crackdown on medical personnel, including the doctor who was sounding the alarm, who's now since passed. So you had it at the initial stages, and then I guess the Chinese government realized, wait a minute, we've got to figure out some sort of way to get ahead of this. We don't want another SARS situation happen where we were being too secretive with the rest of the world about what was going on. So then they began to let the news come out, and now they're trying to pull it back because of what's happening from an economic standpoint to China.
That censorship, those crackdowns, not just happening in China, though. There was a journalist from Malaysia who was charged for some of the commentary that he had put out there about it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, it's a really difficult story, I think, for journalists to cover in a responsible way. And of course, it's compounded that the impression that people have of how journalists are covering it is complicated because, as we've talked about before on this show, a lot of people confuse the news media with social media, and there are a lot of people out there posting about this naturally. And so I think some of the crackdown and some of the response is due to that, but it's also, I think, just a very difficult thing because this is a complicated scientific issue. I think the science community is learning as it goes, and there's always a balance that I think responsible news organizations are trying to strike between informing the public but not over panicking the public. And I think you see a lot of responsible news organizations here where we are still free to publish as we will, trying to strike that balance by adding context to the reporting. So it's clearly a very alarming situation, but I think people are trying to point out, yes, this is a new virus, it's alarming, but it can be fatal, but not everybody who gets it dies from it.
So you talked about some of the other types of approaches where there is a little bit more responsibility in the reporting, and I wanted to ask each of you if you had any specific outlets you had been turning to or sources, and I thought I would start by sharing one that I've been looking to almost daily. ITV in Great Britain runs Channel 4, and one of the things that they've been doing, and you talk about social media and news media and how they're not the same, but sometimes there is that center of the Venn diagram, and they have had playlists available on YouTube that I've been watching each day. One is a segment with a guy by the name of Ben Kavanagh, who is a man from Ireland who was teaching psychology in Wuhan, and it has followed him for the last 3 weeks through the beginning of the quarantine, through his evacuation by the British government, and now where he is in quarantine on a Royal Air Force base, and have been watching him provide updates every single day on what his situation is. And I found it to be fascinating because it takes so much of the fear out of it, that there's so much of the mundane that you see in this guy's life when he was in quarantine in Wuhan, how he got permission to go to the grocery store to get supplies for his apartment again. And even now that he's at the Air Force Base, like, he's playing card games with other people in quarantine. There's just so much normalcy around this. Also, they have found a couple who is in quarantine on the Diamond Princess cruise ship, talking about their experience every day in their stateroom, taking their temperature every 3 hours, reporting it to the nurses, getting their food rations, and what they're finding out each day about what's going on that ship.
I mean, that's the watching getting those stories.
Yeah.
I think is what really helps people to sort of have some sort of narrative around this, especially when you start looking at listening to or reading the stories about the people who are on the cruise ships, and you begin to ask these questions. Well, wait a minute, why can't you take them off the ship, send them back to their home country so they can probably go to an Air Force base or wherever and have quarantine in their own countries, as opposed to everybody being on the ship, and then when one person is diagnosed with having it, then all of a sudden the clock starts again. That's the scary
and this
thing.
couple has been telling that story in each of these different posts. Like, yeah, we thought we were getting out on the 18th. Now it looks like we're here till at least the 19th. Now it looks like we may be here till the 20th.
Right.
He's diabetic. What's the situation with your insulin? Or people who need other supplies of prescription drugs. Like, just the questions we would ask ourselves and are able to relate very easily to people we can see ourselves in.
Right.
Yeah, there was a similar and really good piece that I heard yesterday on NPR on our own KBIA, and about a group of people who had been quarantined for 14 days and they were now being let out of an Air Force base. And one of the guys they interviewed talked about how they had all become friends in this quarantine, and talked about the things they did to try to keep life normal and how they were all going to stay friends, and they had WeChat groups that they had going. So, but one of the things that NPR made a real point to emphasize, and I thought this was really good, they interviewed CDC experts and they interviewed people who are medical personnel about, yes, these people are fine. They have been quarantined. They can now go home and mingle in the community. And I think that's the important thing. You don't want to label people as pariahs because of where they've traveled. Once they've gone through this medical odyssey. This timeout. That's a good way to put it. They're okay. And I think that's the kind of context
but I think
that's very important.
I think that context is important, but I think if you're only getting news about the coronavirus through social media, you're missing that aspect of it, because at least from what I've seen on the stories that I've read that talk about what's out there on this and social media, it only deals with the numbers, how many people have contracted it, how many people have died from it, how far it's spread, that sort of thing.
And we don't know how accurate those numbers may be based on the sources that they're coming from. We also talk about context and the fear around some of this reporting. Those numbers, as you talk about the number of people dead, are still pretty low compared to the seasonal flu that we would experience here in the U.S. There's something like, I think I saw on KOMU either one day last week or the week before, something like 4,000 confirmed cases of the flu with however many deaths in the state of Missouri alone right now.
Right. I mean, and that's even more disheartening, because they have the flu shots out. And they recommend that people get them.
I got mine in September. That's how many months ago? And
there's so many ways in which you can get that, whether you can get it through your insurance, whether you can get it through free clinics. I mean, they have it available, and there are a lot of people who do not get the flu shot, and that leads to what we could probably describe as epidemics in certain areas of the country, because they just didn't take advantage of the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the irony. We're having a panic about this new virus, and we do not do everything that we should do, again, because of false news on social media. Some people are not taking advantage of the vaccine that exists to protect them from, as you said, Earnest, an illness that has killed far more people.
So, Kathy, back in November, we talked about a project that you had been working on. It was part of a trip that we made down to Cape Girardeau about the history of the Stars and Stripes. And in fact, you were down there again about 10 days, 2 weeks ago. And Monday, we find out that the Department of Defense's new budget that they're putting before Congress has a gigantic cut in the funding to that publication. That could be catastrophic to the Stars and Stripes if that budget goes through. Talk for a minute about why.
Well, the amount of money, I think it's about $7 million that they're proposing to cut is really chump change by the Pentagon budget standards, but it would be a devastating blow to Stars and Stripes, which is a newspaper that serves our military and has, as we know, since it was founded in 1861 right here in Missouri by troops under Ulysses Grant. It's really an important paper because it serves a community that otherwise doesn't get news about that are very important to them about military benefits. How are families making it in the military? These are stories that don't make it all the time in the mainstream media, but Stars and Stripes covers them very well. And I think what's disturbing about the Trump administration's decision, and I find it very ironic because the president always says that he wants to make sure our military is the strongest in the world. And in many ways, Stars and Stripes is the most potent weapon our soldiers carry because it's a symbol of free speech. It's funded by the Pentagon, but it has never answered to the Pentagon brass. It has always spoken up for soldiers, so sometimes writing stories that the brass doesn't like, but the soldiers appreciate. And so I think I think what's happening here is what the real subtext is the Pentagon wants Stars and Stripes to be a house organ. They see, hey, wait a minute, we don't control. This isn't one of the quotes from one of the administration officials who was justifying this said, this is not the best way to deliver our message.
Right. We can reach them better ourselves. We don't need that.
Yeah, that's not the point. This is the Stars and Stripes is the free press. It's and I think that's what makes it a really important symbol of what America stands for. And so I think taking away this independent, autonomous organ that serves our soldiers and sailors and Marines, all of our armed forces, really undermines everything President Trump says he's trying to do in supporting the military.
Yeah, I think this is more about control. I mean, your opening statement on this about the fact that in the whole grand scheme of things, especially looking at the massive Pentagon budget, $7 million is like me pulling a quarter out of my pocket, and here it goes to one of the things that I think really sort of gnaws at people when they look at the entire budget that is submitted, now, not just by Trump, but you start looking at every president, going back to FDR in these budgets, their wish list, and the wish list is here's what I like and here's what I don't like, and I'm going to fund the things that I like and defund or not fund things that I don't like. And I mean, every president, Democrat and Republican, has done it. And in this one, I think what really gets at people is that this was a request made by the Defense Department to the president that he include this in his budget. That, I think, is where the problem lies here. And to me, that's all about control.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think these are political appointees, not career appointees who are pushing this. So there really is a political agenda. One would hope that Congress would stand fast with Stars and Stripes. They've been a target since I can remember looking back in the clips, and Bill Malden, who won the Pulitzer Prize for his famous cartoons of G.I. Joe, was criticized by one of the top generals for they were too scruffy. He thought that this wasn't respectful enough, and it was Dwight Eisenhower who stood up for him and said, this is a paper for the troops, and you will keep your hands off.
Okay. On Monday, a new 24-hour cable news channel launched. This promo was among the many designed to help introduce the Black News Channel.
You're going to tell me what I want to know, Charles, or we're going to be here all day.
Tell me something. What do you know about Black America?
The typical crime, poverty, and poor education.
Wrong. That's what the world wants you to believe. In truth, it's all around you. You eat it for breakfast. You obey it on every street corner. Your security is viewing it right now. And for the first time, the world will view it through our eyes.
And that started Monday. This new channel is appearing on cable systems in certain parts of the country. Where do we know so far that it's viewable?
Mainly in the large cities,
Okay.
Major metro areas, and in particular areas where you have large African American populations, which is not unusual. It's probably from a marketing and a distribution standpoint, it's probably the best place to go. This is a much needed initiative. It's being backed by Shakir Khan, who is the owner of the Carolina Panthers football team, and he's in cooperation with the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which is the trade group which represents the black press in the U.S. Where I think there may be some issues with what they're doing here is whether or not that distribution is going to be enough to actually bring in the advertising revenue that's going to be necessary for them to be able to take off, and will it be sustainable? This is not the first initiative.
So talk about that. I started thinking about this as I was preparing things, and I was trying to remember when BET first launched, there was a significant amount of time dedicated to news on BET. It was ostensibly a black news channel, not necessarily black entertainment television. It didn't seem to work there to keep the news format going there. What can be done differently here?
That's what we're going to have to find out, because one of the issues is that you're going to have to generate content on a 24-hour basis, and that is difficult. I mean, you know, as much as we talk about Fox today, when Fox first started, that was part of the struggle that Fox had. It was a part of the struggle that CNN had. Was how you're going to generate the kind of news and information on a 24-hour basis that is going to continue to draw people back. And I think what could happen here is that you're going to have the whole talk show format that you see on all the other cable news networks is going to have to gravitate here, because that's really the only way you're going to be able to, at least in the current media environment, be able to have the kind of content to sustain that. And then it's the question of, are those shows going to be something that attracts viewers?
I'm also intrigued by the folks behind it. One of the faces is J.C. Watt, who's a former football star, but more importantly, a former member of Congress. For a long time, he was one of the
Republican member of Congress.
Yes, one of the very few African American Republican members of Congress. And I looked at the board, and there are a number of African American commentators who are quite conservative. So I will be interested to see where this goes. Now, it also has support, as you've pointed out, Earnest, from people who are down the middle, and even some members of the Black Caucus, which is a predominantly Democratic group, have signed on, and they're excited about it. But I'm really intrigued. I'm very intrigued by what I see the Republican Party doing. Certainly Donald Trump in his State of the Union address and his Super Bowl ad, making a real play for African American voters, particularly African American male voters.
Yeah.
And
although last night Claire McCaskill said during the New Hampshire coverage that the Democrats don't win without black women either. So that push to get women as well. Yeah,
but chipping away at that important constituency, and I just don't know whether this is part of it, but it's when you look at the board, are they going to have a real balance, an ideological balance? It'll just be interesting to watch.
Okay. Gayle King, we talked a lot about how impressed we were with her interview when she did that with R. Kelly a few months back. So I want to ask you some of those same questions about the interview that she did with Lisa Leslie, especially because there has been a clip that's about 95 seconds long that has really sparked some controversy about the way she was doing her job. Let's take a listen to that.
It's been said that his legacy is complicated because of a sexual assault charge, which was dismissed in 2003, 2004. Is it complicated for you as a woman, as a WNBA player?
It's not complicated for me at all. Even if there's a few times that we've been at a club at the same time. Kobe's not the kind of guy, never been like, at least go get that girl or tell her or send her this. I have other NBA friends that are like that. Kobe's, he was never like that. I just never have ever seen him being the kind of person that would do something to violate a woman or be aggressive in that way. That's just not the person that I know.
But Lisa, you wouldn't see it though. As his friend, you wouldn't see it.
And that's possible. I just don't believe that. And I'm not saying things didn't happen. I just don't believe that things didn't happen with force.
Is it even a fair question to talk about it, considering he's no longer with us and that it was resolved? Or is it really part of his history?
I think that the media should be more respectful. At this time, it's like if you had questions about it, you've had many years to ask him that. I don't think it's something that we should keep hanging over his legacy. I mean, it went to trial.
Yeah, with the cases, it was dismissed because the victim in the case refused to testify, so it was dismissed.
And I think that's how we should leave it.
So, of course, they were talking about the death of Kobe Bryant and the charges that were against him about 15 years ago or so. So I guess the first question I would ask, now that we've seen that in the context, because one of the big questions that came about was CBS using excerpts of that to promote it. So in context, was Gayle King right to ask those questions and to bring this up?
Yes, I think she was. I mean, if you are interviewing someone about about their relationship with a certain individual, in this case, she was interviewing Lisa Leslie about
Kobe Bryant.
That's part of it. That's part of his legacy. If you're going to talk to someone about their legacy, you have to talk to them about their entire legacy. And the real issue here in this case is when it comes to African Americans in particular. I mean, whether you're talking about African American men or African American women, and when we talk about the legacy, we want to highlight the great things that they've done, and not so much talk about some of the warts. But if you're going to look at someone's legacy, whether you're talking about Kobe Bryant, whether you're talking about Jim Brown, you can talk any sports figure. You have to look at their entire legacy.
Yeah, and it's not just a matter of race either. I think in this country, there's this impression, a wrong one, that if you die in the state of celebrity, somehow you're automatically canonized. And journalism is about looking at the whole picture. And, Ted Kennedy died, a very painful, sad death, and he was much beloved at the end of his life by his colleagues. But does that mean you don't mention Chappaquiddick? I don't think so. We had this conversation when Don Imus died, and the same thing. Do you not mention some of the really racist things he said? There were a lot of people who really liked him, and certainly there is nothing that will, redemption is definitely possible. And nothing drains away sexism, in my observation, for a guy like having a daughter. So could he have reformed himself? Absolutely. But does that mean you erase history? I don't think that's what we're about as journalists.
One of the things that impressed me, too, was seeing Gayle King again in that follow-up question situation, and how Lisa Leslie talks about how, well, this went through the courts. Well, it went through the courts, but it was dismissed because the person refused to testify, not because those charges were, they couldn't be proven, not to say that they weren't still perhaps an accurate charge.
And Kobe Bryant himself expressed remorse.
And I think this is where some of the unfair criticism of Gayle King comes into play, is that I think those who criticized her wanted her to just drop it at that point. And she's like, no, I'm not going to drop it at that point.
She was setting the record straight.
Absolutely.
And that's part of our job, too.
Right, absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about the CBS edit and the use of that, of snippets of that 90 seconds to promote it. Talk about taking that out of context and Gayle King's stark criticism of the network for having done that.
Well, yes, they did take it out of context, and I think it was someone whose job it was to do that, saying, okay, this is something that I believe will definitely draw viewers in. And if we run this part of it as a promo, this is definitely going to get people to come in because they'll talk about it. It's that controversial thing again, But you took it out of context, and that's where the problem comes into play. And you're thinking more about what's going to draw the audience in, as opposed to making sure that you're accurate and authentic in what it is that you're presenting out there.
But that's the commercial imperative. I mean, that's always going to happen. The headline is never going to be as nuanced as the story, right? And so we always run into those problems. I don't necessarily think that was malicious. I think it was somebody doing what they thought was their job. Yeah. And the interviewee, the woman who was interviewed, who was a friend of Kobe's, obviously she feels badly about that, and then Gayle King feels badly that happened to her. But that happens. It happens because we work for commercial businesses who try to pull in readers or viewers. It's not a malicious
But
thing.
if you aren't thinking about that as you're doing it, you cause more harm than good.
Yes, I agree.
And that's what happened in this case.
Okay, so I didn't make it up late enough Sunday night to see this, but the reaction around the globe was one of shock and celebration.
And the Oscar goes to Parasite.
So the South Korean film winning Best Picture, the first time a foreign language film getting that honor from the Academy.
I sort of felt like this was like the 64th seed beating Duke in the NCAAs, because there was this, everybody loves an underdog story, right? And everybody thought the Quentin Tarantino movie was going to take it. So it wasn't just that it was unexpected, but, they beat the big dog.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. And it was sort of like, just from reading it, because I didn't watch it, because I just don't watch award shows.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you most of the time.
But I read all the stories, and and even leading up to it, it was almost as if it was going to be anticlimactic, because everybody thought that Tarantino was going to basically sweep the awards and they were going to take everything away, and then boom! Not only did they win that, they won 3 other awards that they weren't expected to win, and there's sort of shock all over Hollywood on this. It's like, wait a minute, but this is our award program. This is our award. Why
do you think there was a little bit of the Academy saying, so what's that about Oscar so white?
Well, can we also talk about sharing a little bit of love for Hair Love? They showed that Sunday morning in its entirety on CBS Sunday morning, and that was probably one of the sweetest films that I have seen. It's an animated short, so it's maybe 6-7 minutes, but sweetest films that is about black hair,
right?
But at the same time is about the relationship between a father and a daughter, and you then come to see the mother come into the picture too. It was such a story that transforms it.
It's all great, but here's the problem I have, and I know we're running out of time. The problem
we still have a minute or two.
The problem I have with all of this is that next year we could be right back here again talking about Oscar so white, because we only do it when it seems to be a crisis.
Okay. To our director, Travis McMillan, mark that date. We may need to pull this back up from the archives. We are just about out of time for today. Thanks for hanging with us for the last half hour. I'd like to thank Travis McMillan for directing today's program, to Aaron Hay for handling the audio for us. Tim Pilcher composed our original theme music. We will be with you again next week for another edition of Views of the News.